Life will win over death, and the light will win over darkness.
When Putin launched his illegal invasion 2 years ago, the free world was united in its response. We stood together behind Ukraine, and on this grim anniversary, we must renew our determination. I was in Kyiv just a few weeks ago, and I met wounded Ukrainian soldiers. Each harrowing story was a reminder of Ukraine's courage in the face of terrible suffering. A reminder of the price they are paying, not only to defend their country against a completely unjustified invasion, but also to defend the very principles of freedom, sovereignty and the rule of law on which we all depend. So we are going further in our support.
By providing our biggest single package of defence aid to Ukraine, taking our total support to over £12 billion. We'll be investing around £250 million to provide them with urgently needed ammunition, and £200 million to become their largest supplier of drones.
And by signing a 10-year agreement on security cooperation, the first of its kind. This will formalise the support we're providing to Ukraine, including intelligence sharing, cybersecurity, medical and military training, and defence industrial cooperation.
This is the moment to show that tyranny will never triumph. To say once again that we will stand with Ukraine today and tomorrow, prepared to do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes, until they prevail. Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Lucille. I appreciate the heads up there. I had the mic muted again, so let's get that fixed up. Welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today, and glad to have you here. That video was Rishi Sunak, British Prime Minister. He was sharing sharing that Ukraine, even after 2 years, it's the 2-year anniversary as of 2 days ago, of the start of the full-scale invasion. It's not the start of the war, though. The start of the war happened in 2014 with the illegal annexation of Crimea and the staged uprisings in Luhansk and Donetsk. And I do mean staged because it's pretty clear that Russia basically marched their own soldiers in without insignia. They brought in Russian equipment, Russian materiel, everything except for their Russian flags on their sleeves. A hidden operation that was intended to look like a popular uprising, and yet it was not. So this is the war on its 2-year anniversary. There's a lot of things going on today. It was a tremendously busy weekend, so buckle up. We got a lot to cover. We're going to start off with the loss of the first Abrams in the conflict. And this is what the Russians have put out there. You can see the blowout panels have been taken out. This is believed to have happened in the Avdiivka direction, an area where Russia has been pushing extremely hard. Additional here, some additional information associated with this. But the Ukraine control map says it's likely near Berdichi. That's just, it's pretty busy is what it is. It's been pretty rough over there. They also provided a video that it purported to show a NASAMS launcher also being destroyed near the front lines. That video's got a few issues with it. However, at this point, I have no reason to doubt that it is actually a NASAMS launcher that may have been impacted. There's just a few quirks that leave me with a little bit of a question. That said, overall, that's a pretty rough start to the video right there. Let's go ahead and move on to the metallurgic plant in Lipetsk. Now, just so you're clear, Russia has claimed that this metal plant, makes no military equipment. It's entirely civilian. I don't believe that in the slightest, because it's a metal plant. It's going to be making metal components for tanks and planes and anything they need to, bombs. Russia's economy is tied down to making everything they need to prosecute this war. The media has been stating that Ukraine's security services were behind the attack. No report on exactly what it was that they did it with, though all the normal possibilities are open. They might have some more information in here. There we go. Okay, drones, according to Intel Crab, this is relatively recent information here, targeted this plant, the Novolipetsk metallurgical plant, the largest steel mill in Russia. And we've got videos of the explosions thereof. This is going to be vital war industry. And here's the denial here, right here. They deny any connection with the Russian military-industrial complex. They state they only produce civilian products. The Institute for the Study of War put out their take on it. Ukrainian Special Services drones conducted a drone strike on one of Russia's largest metallurgical plants on the night of February 23 to 24. Ukrainian outlet Suspilin reported that sources stated that the Ukrainian Security Service and Ukrainian main military intelligence directorate organized a drone strike on Novolipetsk metallurgical plant, and that damage will stop production at the plant for a long time. They claim the oblast governor claimed that the Russian forces intercepted 2 drones and that the plant operations were not significantly affected. That always amazes me when they've got these videos of tremendous conflagrations, huge fires, and they claim that there's no significant impact. It'd be easier and better to tell the truth, but that's Russia for you. According to Radio Free Europe, in July 2023, this plant won contracts to supply steel to the Izumrud plant in Vladivostok, which the Russian Federal Agency for State Property Management controls, and which produces artillery control systems, drone engines, and systems for dropping explosives from drones. So there you go. There's your military link. They claim no military link. They claim no significant damage. And yet, we can immediately tie all of these things right back to the truth. I'm going to briefly pause here. Thank you very much for joining me. Glad to see you, Lucille and Jerry. Thanks for the heads up on the sound. That's the one thing I've got to make sure I'm tracking when I do this switch over here, is whether the sound is muted or not. Because during the intro videos, I'd prefer to not have my own voice or something come through while that's going. If you have any questions about today's video or the updates in Ukraine, or you want to ask about something you've heard and don't have good information on, absolutely drop it in the comments. I'll be watching for it. I've had a lot of thinking this weekend, and just a lot of thoughts on the war lately, and maybe I'll touch on some of them at the very end. Let's go ahead and move on to the news out of Ukraine itself. According to President Zelensky, Western long-range weapons won't be used outside of Ukraine. They're specifically stating that if it's Western provided, it will be used on the territory of Ukraine, including Crimea, and they will not use Western weapons on actual Russian territory. They've produced plenty of drones and missiles themselves that they can use for that very purpose. So the idea is that if the West can provide missiles and equipment that Ukraine can use inside their country, they'll handle their own production for anything that goes outside. You'll note a pattern coming up later in the video again. One of the things that Russia was so determined to hit so hard last year was Ukraine's grain output. They were closing down the Black Sea. They were closing down the Black Sea grain corridor and the Black Sea grain deal. They were striking grain facilities. And it seems like Russians have not given up on trying to destroy Ukraine's grain because, Once again, they've struck another grain storage building with S-300 missiles. From the Defense Intelligence of the UK here, we've got basically one of their little updates talking about how Russia's used energy as a weapon. And I'll just go ahead and read it through for you here. Russia's kinetic strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure has caused widespread electricity shortages across the nation, while globally Russian President Vladimir Putin has used energy policy to undermine international energy security. By reducing gas flows to Europe through restricting pipeline exports and altering payment terms, Putin has sought to undermine unity across Europe against Russia's illegal war. Russia's weaponization of energy will likely remain a coercive instrument, demonstrating the links between Russia's security and energy policy. It is highly likely that Russia will continue to use energy as a weapon for global economic gain and political influence, signifying the link between energy, security, political, and military objectives. It's basically going all in on the war. And here's a graphic that shows how Russia's used energy as a weapon over time. Kind of a little bit, the first part's cut off here. It says Crimea annexed, and Russia sees Black Sea gas platforms as the first two. And this is just showing how they've seized Chernobyl, demanded for payment for gas in rubles, seized the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plants, reduced gas flows, more gas flows reduced. They targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and they deployed to the Turk Stream and Blue Stream gas pipelines in the Black Sea. They're working... Is it? No. Ozzy, I should have good sound going through. I'm showing it. If it's still showing as no sound in about 60 seconds, let me know. I'll just go ahead and type that in here. Okay, sorry about that. I apologize for that brief delay there. Let's go ahead and continue on here. Energy as a weapon. Russia is targeting every economic interest they can. They're using energy to try and break and fracture the alliances. This is total war. There is no neutral country that Russia cannot manipulate to cause issues in this regard. Remember that even though Russia's smaller, they have invested heavily in their intelligence infrastructure. They've really revamped their spy operation in Europe. They've gone after every inflection point where they can potentially fracture the alliance against them, and now they're just putting even more pressure on it. In fact, the SBU exposed a couple of FSB agents who were preparing a missile attack in Lviv. Among the targets were the main power plants that provide light to the entire region. A 44-year-old man and his wife are suspected of treason. This is where they're targeting that energy infrastructure. And it's really getting to the point where where Russia is going all in on this war. They may not be able to mobilize their whole population, but doggone it, they're going to mobilize every agent and every resource to try and knock Ukraine out of this fight with the minimum amount of investment on the front lines. Zelensky did sign a bill on conditions for demobilization of conscripts. These are the ones that were conscripts whose term of service expired after the start of the war during martial law. They were extended and extended and extended, and they likely would like to go home at some point in time. They've done their service. Some of them might be induced to come back, but for now, they've set up conditions so that those soldiers can actually go home to their families and try to return to a normal life. And they will go on with mobilizing more people and calling for more volunteers. So that's the situation on that. Of course, somebody said, Demobilization, the West is not providing enough material, but even if it did, won't Ukraine lose the war if it doesn't mobilize? Russia has meat to expend, and it does not give any care about how many men it loses. They will keep on coming. And that's true. At some point in time, though, Ukraine has to act like the democracy that it is. It has to follow the rules of law. And it has to then work on other sources to mobilize men to be able to take on this threat. At some point, it will be so desperate that they may not have that as an option. But while they do, they better take the option. This one is going around the information sphere here. Wanted you to kind of see it here. Zelensky said during a recent interview that 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in Russia's war. This could be one of those, it's true, but from a certain point of view things. And the reason I say that is because the other estimates I've seen have been at least 40-some thousand confirmed, as in names and everything, and up to 70,000 is what they're reporting. Now, this still puts Ukraine at a tremendous advantage against Russia, which has been losing troops anywhere between 3 to 5 times the quantity compared to Ukraine. And these are just deaths, not injuries. But that, I suspect, because I don't know this for sure, and I'm just giving you that clarification, but I suspect that he is specifically referring to those who were outright killed and not just those who were wounded beyond being able to return to any service at all. There's going to be plenty of those. And it could be that there's additional factors I don't know about. Either way, that's the first number that Ukraine has put out officially. And it will likely rise. It could also have been one that he got from some time ago or something like that. Don't know the details. From Rustem Umerov, the defense minister of Ukraine, corruption during war is worse than terrorism. There will be no negotiations with those who steal from our soldiers and our society. And there's a lot of pushback on this statement in the comments below. It's a tough one, and I absolutely agree that it's a tough comparison. However, and hear me out for just a second, terrorism usually impacts one place. Its effects are immediate, and then it is over, and you can deal with the consequences. As little from the broader perspective, it is nothing more than an attack by Russia. There is no difference as far as the actual results go. But corruption steals the bullets from your guns, steals the food from your mouths, steals the gasoline and the petrol from your tanks, the tanks of your vehicles, steals the tires off your vehicles. It steals the tools from your maintenance depots. It steals the uniforms and equipment right out of your supply depots. It has a constant impact on the war. Constant. There is no aspect of the war that will not be reduced and diminished and destroyed by corruption. Look at Russia early in the war. The only real reason they weren't able to push into Kiev was because of Russian corruption. They had tires that were rotting off, and they were low-quality Chinese tires instead of good quality military tires. They had tanks that were empty of fuel instead of being filled. They had vehicles and equipment that were not properly maintained or put together because their soldiers had stolen parts and sold them off to get vodka and other things. Corruption will kill a military far more than a single attack, or in this case, a single terrorist attack compared. I don't necessarily say that's the 100% on that, but I can absolutely see where Rustem Umerov is coming from. Ukraine has caught up with Russia in the production of kamikaze drones, similar to the Shahed drones. What explodes in Russia, he says, is all ours. That's right. All those drones that they're producing, they can send them into Russia, and if it does, it was a Ukrainian drone that took it out, not an American or French or any other Western country. They're doing that all on their own. This is the commentary on the number of Ukrainian losses. The estimate that they were talking about was 70,000 with 120,000 wounded, still far less than Russia's 400,000 between the two numbers. But still, that number is in dispute. We'll put it that way. Over the weekend, Ukraine put out a series of posts thanking countries for their support and listing off some of the ways they helped out, including Slovakia, Slovenia, the U.S., Britain, France, Germany, all of them. They're all here. And I'm not going to go through them all. Just understand that Ukraine truly is thankful for the support and assistance they're receiving. From Jason J. Smart, journalist with the Kiev Post, if we get help from the United States, according to President Zelensky, we can begin to push Russia back. If not, then we will have to focus only on defense. Ukrainian people are ready to fight, says Jason. However, without American weapons, they cannot and can only hope to defend current lines. And that's the situation they're looking at right now. As things stand right now, the best Ukraine can do with no support from America is defend the lines. They can cause Russia to expend huge numbers of troops and equipment to take each inch of the country. But wars are not won entirely on defense. Stalemates can be caused by entirely on defense. But in the end, if you cannot take the battle to the enemy, there will be no victory for your side. Just an end. The head of the presidential office, Andrei Yermak, has stated that Ukraine is working to restore the operation of one of its airports, allowing international flights back in. They didn't say which one, and there's a lot of security issues that need to be resolved, but they're working on it. That'll allow them to bring in more people and equipment from abroad and maybe start restoring something that looks vaguely like normal for some aspects of society. This is an interesting story here. During the visit of German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock to Mykolaiv yesterday, her motorcade was followed for some time by a Russian reconnaissance drone. Because of this, Baerbock had to end her visit ahead of schedule. Now, I've seen this one in a couple other places, and the story gets a lot more detailed than that. And the report is that the group was heading out in a car, and all of a sudden the Ukrainians in the car got a notification on their cell phone of a Russian drone in their area. They spotted it, and they took off running to try and get away from this drone. And by running, I mean they were going flat out in this car on these awful roads that they've got over there, trying to get away from the eyes of this drone. They did eventually manage to lose it somewhere along the way, though it took some pretty skillful driving on the part of the drivers of that vehicle convoy. So interesting, kind of a bit of backstory on that, seeing how things are coming together on that. This was about 50 kilometers behind the front lines, so it wasn't necessarily expected to have a drone operating that far back. But Russia's been improving the range of their one-way attack drones and the range of some of their intelligence drones, their intelligence gathering drones. So they got to watch out for those things now. Let's go ahead and move over to news out of Russia itself. This defense intelligence update from the UK talks about the situation in the Black Sea. It's really kind of tooting Ukraine's horn. I'm going to post the link here in case you want it. But overall, it's talking about Ukraine's success in pushing the Black Sea fleet effectively out of the Black Sea. And there's this map right here that's really pretty good at this, showing the areas that Russia could potentially operate their fleet in various levels of risk. Up here in the Sea of Azov and close to the shore near Russia itself, Russia's got a relatively low risk, so they can operate their vessels there. But over here, down here in this region too, in the southeast corner, this is higher risk. This area near the near Istanbul and the Bosphorus Strait, even higher risk indeed. And of course, up here, this area right here next to Ukraine itself, they're entirely denied naval operations in this area. According to a Ukraine-based open source organization, Frontelligence Insight, Russian forces are storing missiles and ammunition in previously abandoned facilities near the Russo-Ukrainian border and in occupied Ukraine to shorten and bolster Russian logistics lines. This is a sharp move by Russia, assuming they can keep the locations relatively under wraps. If these locations are going to be well known to Ukraine, they will be targeted extensively, and it's something to keep in mind overall. But by shortening their supply lines, staging these supplies on both the Russian border and Russian-Ukrainian border, and of course in the occupied territories, these areas will be more able to bring that ammunition forward with less risk, because they can bring it in, truck it into there, unload, get out, and then just bring out what they need a little bit at a time. I apparently found a lot of stuff from the Ministry of Defense for the UK today. Russia originally deployed approximately 130 battalion tactical groups for its invasion of Ukraine. This likely included approximately 1,300 tanks, over 5,000 infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers, and at least 100,000 personnel. In 2 years of conflict, Russian losses match and in many cases surpass those that comprised its original force. Confirmed Russian losses include over 2,700 tanks and 5,000 IFVs. Russia's killed and wounded are likely approximately 350,000 personnel. Mobilization and recruitment, production and refurbishment of existing stockpiles means that losses have been replaced. Russian forces in Ukraine are now larger in number than at the start of the war. It is now able to maintain attacks along the front line and pursue a strategy of attrition against Ukrainian forces. They've been activating and bringing in all the equipment they can. We've seen video and images of T-55s and T-54 tanks, literally just post-World War II, that have been activated and brought to the front lines to equip some of the Russian units. Anything that they can activate with treads or wheels is being sent to the front lines. Warehouses belonging to the aeronautical company of Sukhoi in the Begovy district, Moscow, are burning. Now, this one had a little bit of information attached, but not a lot. So we don't know the exact reason for these warehouses burning. But Sukhoi is a major aircraft manufacturer for Russia. So interesting to see happening. Over in the Belgorod region, some construction workers, is what they called them, who were constructing defenses along the front lines in Russia, were killed. 3 of them killed, 3 of them wounded by a drone strike in the region. There, you can see the photos of the car itself and how much damage was done. As Western sanctions, according to the Kyiv Independent, designed to cripple Russian energy exports, barely slow them down, the Kremlin continues to make enough money to keep its war against Ukraine going indefinitely, just by selling its oil to China and India. So they're finding ways to get their oil out the door in whatever means they can. And that's what they're using to pay for their war at this point. China and India's been kind of changing their tune a bit, cooling on Russia as a supplier and as a partner. But China shows no real sign of slowing down. Maybe a little bit here and there. They did say that they weren't going to be doing some deals between Russian and Chinese banks. But overall, that's how the Kremlin is keeping the money flowing for their assaults. And foodstuffs, too, I might just add. According to Kirilo Budanov, Transnistria is not planning to appeal to join Russia. That kind of matches more closely what I would expect. If they upset that particular apple cart right now, when they don't have the support of Russia close at hand, it's not going to go well for Transnistria. Or it'll go very well for Transnistria, depending on which side you are on. Partisans in Crimea report tampering with Russian tanks bound for the front. That's right, they found a bunch of tanks sitting on rail cars that were bound for Zaporizhia, and they, as they say, secretly customized them in Crimea. They may not make it to the front and definitely will never return. The partisan activities in Crimea itself are getting very robust, and there's a lot of signs of things going on there that I'll probably try to talk about a little bit later in the video. Construction on a rail line from Mariupol to Crimea has begun. They're showing the preparatory work for the further construction of the railway, according to satellite images, to connect Rostov-on-Don to Crimea through the occupied territories. Ozzy says the thing about oil, if Russian oil is not in the market, oil prices go up worldwide. The aim of the oil sanctions is to limit Russian profits while keeping it on the world market. Yes, that's true, Ozzy. The thing is that they're trying to evade ways of reducing that profit as well. Of course, Ukraine has a vote in that because they've been attacking all of Russia's oil facilities that they have in range of their drones. Over in Crimea, there have been explosions over a naval military facility. Looks like the air defenses have been operating pretty aggressively at this point, and we don't have any reports on exactly what this was. This is from earlier today, so we'll be looking forward to more reports on this possibly tomorrow. This is an interesting admission to TASS from Dmitry Medvedev. He admitted that residents of the occupied regions of Ukraine are waiting for the Ukrainian army. They're biding their time, hoping for Ukraine to come to their rescue. Basically, he said, we'll deport such people to Siberia. Effectively, ethnic cleansing. And one item from Ruski Mir today, kind of in the same vein of if somebody tells you who they are, you should believe them. If we had solved the problem with Georgia in 2008, we would have had a land border in Armenia, and life in Armenia would be very different. Armenia has been turning away from Russia recently. They have been turning towards the West in hopes of getting real security guarantees and assistance, especially against the Azerbaijanis. This is a straight-up admission that Russia wanted to go further. And further is what they intend to go. Everyone who claims, no, they wouldn't go past Ukraine. Well, they said they wouldn't go past Georgia. They said they wouldn't go past Chechnya. They said they wouldn't do any of those things. And yet they did. There is not an agreement out there where Russia has said we're going to stay out of an area that has been actually respected and kept. I'm going to take a brief pause here, grab a drink of water, because my voice is telling me I better. One of the things that comes up in the debates about whether the U.S. should be supporting Ukraine is this idea that Ukraine is not a national security issue for America. And I will counter that today for just a moment. We committed, along with Russia, who has broken their commitment, to ensure the territorial integrity of Ukraine after they gave up their nuclear weapons. By not keeping our word in that case, dictators and bad actors across the world will see that the world itself is open. And every destruction they cause, every situation they create, where the U.S. does not respond and is a faithless actor on the world stage, diminishes the U.S. power in the world, diminishes it to the point where there is no reason for anybody to be our friend or ally. Why would you? Why would Britain remain our friend and ally if, even despite the one time that NATO Article 5 was invoked by the U.S. after 9/11, where Britain sent troops and equipment, and their men died alongside American men, and their equipment was lost alongside American equipment? If we are not going to be a faithful, honorable partner, why would Britain be our friend? Why would France? Why would Taiwan? Why would the big production houses across the world? Why would global trade use the American dollar? The answer is it wouldn't. It's a good situation. It's a sweet deal for America. And the loss of that standing would open us up to further attacks on our supply lines, on our equipment, on our nation as a whole. And that is why I believe, at least one of the reasons I believe, that the war in Ukraine, the unjust war in Ukraine, is a vital national security interest to America. Is that all of it? No, there's plenty more. But it's one of the things that's been on my mind for a few days, especially after a conversation I had. Articulating those things is difficult enough. But the truth is, most of the people who are opposed to aiding Ukraine won't get hung up on a single item. They can absolutely admit that the U.S. promised, but that doesn't matter to them. They'll just move on to the next region. Well, Ukraine is full of Nazis, or Ukraine is chock full of corruption. But in the end, if the U.S. is not willing to keep its word when the bill comes due, nobody's going to actually give us the credit and be our friend, our ally, or come to our aid when we need it. And that's my thoughts. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the international front here real quick. Told you today was going to be chock full of stuff, so let's keep on going. From the United Kingdom, the Right Honorable Grant Shapps, we're now able to get Ukraine more of what they most need to fight and win. They're announcing a new £245 million package to boost Ukraine's artillery reserves. There's been artillery shells showing up around the world that people are working on getting all of getting pulled in for Ukraine. The Czechs have got something they're working on over there. Canada sent some money to the Czechs to try and get those shells brought in. South Korea, South Africa, or at least African countries, I should say. A lot of possibilities of where they might get those shells from. Over in Poland, activists brought 2 tons of manure to the residence of the Russian ambassador. This was timed to coincide with the 2-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. According to Dominic, an activist, we wanted to send a clear signal to the Polish authorities and the European Union. It's time to expel Russian diplomats from our country. And make no mistake, Russian diplomats are also spies. German Chancellor Scholz has once again ruled out delivery of long-range Taurus missiles, declaring that the issue is very irritating, that he does not want to be pulled into the war as a country because he doesn't want to put his soldiers on the ground in Ukraine. Then again, why not just teach Ukraine how to program the missiles and they can use them themselves? This indicates that Scholz is having trouble justifying his position now, especially since he's finding it very irritating. South Korea has announced some additional export controls on Russia and Belarus. That's because any goods they've been getting some goods that are dual use or potentially military from South Korea. So now South Korea is tightening those restrictions. Germany is working, according to Der Spiegel, Germany is negotiating with India to get additional artillery ammunition from the country for Ukraine. The thing is, they call this discreet negotiations. If it was discreet, it wouldn't be in the paper. Okay, we've already talked about that earlier. So we've talked about Poland, and I'm gonna be addressing this. In fact, I'm just gonna move this over to Poland real fast, and then we'll just do Poland right now. The first offenders who scattered Ukrainian grain at the border with Poland have already appeared in court. It appears that overall the Polish law enforcement is finally putting out the actual justice in regards to this. There's still a lot more to go because, as you'll be able to see, the Polish carriers are planning to continue or actually rejoin protests at Ukraine's border on March 1st, claiming that their demands have not been met. They're blocking 6 checkpoints on the border with Ukraine with 2,200 trucks waiting in line. And Anton Hershchenko kind of sums it up like this. At the Rawaruska Hrebin checkpoint, Polish farmers who organized a border blockade scattered nails and screws all over the road. It was Poles who drove a pickup truck along the road and scattered screws and nails from the trunk. They did this so that Ukrainian drivers had their wheels flat and could not drive further. This is literal destruction of property. On Sunday night, 8 rail cars out of 40 with Ukrainian corn were cracked open in Poland. Poland cannot collect all the corn that was spilled out of the wagons in Kotomierz because it got dirty. 160 to 180 tons were poured out on the ground, 30 tons contaminated, and will be sent for disposal or for biodiesel production. This corn was not intended to go into Poland. It wasn't even going to stop in the European Union. It was going to the port to be shipped to Morocco. Polish farmers also plan to block the checkpoint on the border with Lithuania. They will stop and check all vehicles that may be carrying Ukrainian grain. And Anton Hershchenko's comment is, who wins in this situation? The answer is obvious. Putin is very pleased with it. He also went out, according to the mayor of Brzezinsk, never mind, that town in Poland, who I'm not even going to try to pronounce because I didn't look it up in advance. Europe is flooded with Russian grain, and this is causing huge problems. Almost 15% of the grain currently delivered to the EU comes from Russia. Putin is using grain prices to destabilize the workings of the European Union and any allies to Ukraine. Literally, they're dumping their grain on the market, driving down the price, and odds are it's Ukrainian grain. They've been stealing it right off of Ukrainian fields. So, as Anton says, the food terrorism is working. This is the 4th case of vandalism at Polish railway stations. They're starting to work on getting some actual punishment for these people. And I think they're going to have to dig deep because I think they're going to find a whole lot of Russian fingers behind this protest. Or as Oystein Bogen states, all signs point to a major Russia hybrid operation now taking place in Poland, involving angry farmers and pro-Putin political groups attacking Ukrainian grain. Sabotage concealed as civil disobedience and freedom of expression is one of the oldest tricks in the GRU textbook. And it does appear, at least from my external perspective, that there's Russian fingers in these protests. Ukraine is in negotiations with France in order to get some of their Mirage 2000 fighters. This is an interesting switch up and good to see it happening. The Mirage 2000 is an excellent fighter from all the reports I've seen. So if they can get their hands on some, it'll be a nice bonus to their F-16s. The European Union announced they'll transfer almost 170,000 shells to Ukraine by the end of March and are working to increase the volume of supplies. And for Sweden, the Hungarian parliament has ratified Sweden's application to join NATO. This is important for Ukraine because the word is that Sweden will be happy to send their Gripen fighters, which are great fighters for the type of operations that Ukraine already does with their Soviet-era equipment. The Gripen will be great for that exact same situation. Rough airfields, quick concealment of the aircraft, all of these aspects that are really going to be good for use in Ukraine. That was, by the way, the last country to approve their NATO accession for Sweden. Let's go move over to South Korea for a moment or two here. According to CNN, Russians were the largest single nationality that applied for asylum in South Korea last year. 18,800 applicants from Russia. Next was Kazakhstan at 2,094. We're talking, 9 times more Russians? It looks like Russia might be having some trouble with their population. Lithuania has raised more than 8 million euros to buy equipment for the Ukrainian military. That was from a fundraising campaign that was organized by the group there. And this is for purchasing Lithuanian-made safe soldier kits for Ukrainian troops. So even the countries who can't necessarily pull any more out of their budgets are fundraising amongst their populace and getting this together. President Zelensky was talking about U.S. aid, and I would just want to touch on this one for a moment. There is hope for Congress, he said, and I'm sure there will be positivity. I have met with senators and representatives of both parties, and they know that we need their decision within a month. I am counting on the U.S. to remain the leader of democracy in the world. It's not about money, he said, but about weapons. If these weapons are not available, we will be weakened. We will find money, but without the U.S., we will not find so many weapons. And that's the international news and the latest round of protests over in Poland. Let's go ahead and move on to the front lines. Over in Sevastopol, there were reports of powerful explosions. I kind of mentioned some of this earlier, but it seems like there's a lot of action over in Crimea tonight. But that's not exactly making it easy on the front lines. And I'll tell you that straight up, there's been attacks all across and some rough things going on. The worst area is over here west of Avdiivka, where Ukrainian forces have been doing a delaying action, pulling back to more defensible lines, likely in this area around the Orlivka, Toninke area right here. Let's go and take a look at the next couple of days of updates, where Russia has taken Sevierne, Lastochkyne, and continued to press on and on, working on trying to take additional territory. Ukraine has had to pull back to more defensible positions. The cauldron that was Avdiivka is not sustainable once Russia has effectively flattened every building and structure in the area. And without having artillery shells coming in to be able to counter Russia, they've had to fall back. It's rough, very rough. I'll clear that line out of there. Moving up to Bakhmut, Russians did manage to break into Ivanovsky and entered the first streets with heavy combat going on. This would be just west of Bakhmut. North and east of the settlement, Russian advances were recorded. There was also a war crime that was carried out at that place. Russian soldiers accepted the surrender of 9 Ukrainian soldiers. I'm obviously not going to play this video, who they then murdered outright. So they just shot them dead. This was done near the mouth of their trench. Let's talk about Lastochkyne a little bit more here. This is the latest update from this morning, actually. Russian forces are inside Sverne, which means that small settlement is lost. We already mentioned that already. And you can see here that the advances are continuing on, with Ukrainian forces having to hold the line a little bit farther back. Now, they're not going to defend Lastochkyne because if you look at the plat map, look at the map, basically, Lastochkyne is in a bowl, a deep, kind of a deep area down there, one that would be difficult to defend and would allow Russia to basically just shell the town like with impunity. Defense forces, according to the Tavria spokesman, withdrew from the village of Lastochkyne. They're going to organize defense lines along the line of the settlements of Orlivka, Toninke, and Berdichi in order to prevent the advance of Russian troops in the western direction. So that's the situation near Avdiivka. Rough area. Now let's move over to Robotyne. Now, the Russians crowed early on this weekend saying that they had taken Robotyne itself. Well, as with most things, you got to take that with a grain of salt. They tried to do an insertion assault, basically tossed a couple of troops on the top of a BMP, drove heck for leather right into the middle of town, managed to get some guys into the post office, and then had their ride shot out from under them. The BMP was destroyed, and the group that was there was at the post office was also destroyed likewise, leaving the lines unchanged. Still, it is not an easy situation near Robotyne. You can see that's getting rather complicated and difficult. Rybar did claim that that they had Robotyne, put in a whole post on it, but hours later it was basically retracted. Or as Intel Crab says, Ukraine still holds in Robotyne. Several assaults were repelled in the direction of this settlement. Hi, Paul. Glad to have you on board today. Thanks for joining me. And I'm just right at the end here. I'm just about to switch into the extras for today. Is there any questions? Well, before I get into those, if you have any questions, now's the time to pipe in and let me know. I'm going to take a quick drink of water, and I'll get into the extras, and I'll address any questions at the end. Remember, I'm more than happy to get comments as well. If you see that I've missed something that you might find important, that you've seen somewhere else, please let me know about it. Moving ahead, the head of Ukrainian intelligence, Kirill Budanov, noted that Ukraine owes its successes in Crimea to the inhabitants of the peninsula, who not only strengthened resistance to the occupiers, but also found the opportunity to monitor the entire operational situation on the peninsula and transmit this information as quickly as possible. It's clear there is a strong partisan movement in Crimea and in the occupied territories. The head of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people published a statement. 10 years of temporary occupation of Crimea did not break the will of its inhabitants. The statement further said that over the 10 years of annexation, Russia has turned Crimea into a continuous military bridgehead where mass crimes against the residents of Crimea occur, including murders, forced disappearances, politically motivated persecution, attacks on other fundamental freedoms, including freedom of expression, freedom of religion or belief. However, 10 years of temporary occupation of Crimea did not break the will of the Crimean Tatar people, and a significant part of the inhabitants of Crimea of different nationalities. They remain faithful to the Ukrainian state and devoted to their land, providing nonviolent resistance to the Russian occupation. Moving outside of Ukraine for a moment here, I'm going to briefly touch on this one here. There's a balloon currently flying over the United States that the scrambled fighter jets But they state it's not from China. It's an amateur balloonist. We'll watch this one carefully. Imagine, as this person says, imagine what a professional balloonist could do. Also, staying outside of Ukraine for a moment or two, the American probe that was sent to the moon fell over. However, even though it's laying sideways, the instruments continue to work. Interesting to see that they are continuing with the mission as much as they can. From Crimean Wind, this is Russian propaganda here. As of February 24, 2022, Ukraine had 250 airplanes and helicopters. Of these, by February 24, 2024, 839 aircraft and helicopters had been destroyed, according to Russia. And that's after noting that, of course, the Allies have only transferred a minimal amount of aircraft of any types to Ukraine. Some helicopters and some Soviet-era jets, but certainly not 600 of them. Could you imagine if we had? Whew. All NATO countries have now ratified Sweden's accession, of course, but Jason J. Smart decided to give a little bit of sarcasm to the moment, with this special plaque awarded to Vladimir Putin for his outstanding achievement as the 2022 NATO Salesman of the Year. And we'll end with, this is Zuzha. She sits on the ruins of her home in Mirnorod, even though her owners survived, which they did. She has refused to leave, at least for the time being. Her owners are survived and are making sure she's taken care of. But this is dedication. A small piece of that dedication. And once again, I'm reminded of, if this is how the Ukrainians treat the least among them, taking care of their pets, their dogs, their cats, their horses, their animals. Imagine what kind of people they really are inside. And that's everything for today. Thank you very much for joining me. Do want to say, if you've seen particular comments or complaints about the Ukraine war that you'd kind of like to have a couple of thoughts on, go ahead and start letting me know what those are. The ones I see, I kind of try and mention as I go, like the one where it's like, why is this a U.S. National security interest here? And there are many arguments for them and arguments against them. If you've seen a couple that you'd kind of like to have me address, go ahead and drop them in. I might be able to tell you a couple of lines or something, or a couple of things I've seen. But either way, the real key is to stay informed yourselves. Get out there, do the research. I try and provide all of my sources here so you can see them. And if you ever have a question as to where a source is, let me know. I'll try and drop a link to you for it during the live stream. But more than anything else, if we stay informed, if we stay and carefully vet our sources and check them against everything we know and check them against the things we can confirm, I am convinced that the truth will result in exactly one conclusion. But if you don't have that truth, how are you to come to that one conclusion? And that's everything again for today. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed today's video, hit me with that old thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new here and want to keep up on the Ukraine war or see me talk about the U.S. political situation. I've got a few things to comment on that too, both on both sides of the aisle. That'll be coming up soon. I've got to spend a little bit of time and put that together. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.